So today we will have a short lecture. Short but kind of important. Okay. So let's just recapitulate where we left last time. So the basic scenario is that we kind of find ourselves as being thrown into a world with other beings. This is the basic scenario here, and these only the things that are related to that are going to be part of the discourse, because a lot of the roads to get to the metaphysical level is letting go, is pushing things aside. So it's about, so once everything is let go in this complete way, then we are in this scenario of being thrown into a world, beings thrown into the world with other beings that are also thrown into the world. And this throwedness, as Heidegger calls it, should be one of the essential things that beings have in common with other beings. The fact that everybody is thrown. So this is already some kind of a point of commonality and potentially point of contact. Then to these scenarios, there are the patches of light. And the patches of light are places where the world opens up. Sometimes Heidegger calls these places with light clearings, like in a forest that all of a sudden there's a lighter area, so he calls it a clearing. And in these places where there's a light, that is where self-showing is possible. The being go under the light, and in the light they can do their self-showing. This is where I left it last time. And then these open places, these clearing where beings can go and do this self-showing, this is where truth happens, but the most elementary concept of truth, which is not a correspondence with something else, but just a place where beings show themselves, and when they show themselves, then a truth is happening in this clearing. It's a pretty clumsy way of talking, that's Heidegger, after all, but I think that the point is relatively clear. Okay. So into this framework, Heidegger introduces another pair of concepts, the earth and the world. And these two concepts are important because later on, as we will find out, that's what a work of art is supposed to do. To set up a world, and it set up the earth that the world is founded on, and to show the happening of truth in the artwork will be very much related to the way the earth and the world are presented relative to each other. All that stuff is in the origin of the work of art of Heidegger. You can read it, the origin of the work of art. You can read it next time. We will continue talking about it. Now, so the world is where things showing up, where truth happens, And this truth, the idea of either partaking, like showing yourself in this area, or looking at another being showing themselves in this area, these aspects of the world are full of sense of joy and ecstasy, according to Heidegger. And the earth is the rest. So you can define, here we get into a slightly more complicated issue, that logically you could say that the setting should be all the places when there's light, and as opposed to the places where they are dark. So all the dark places should be something like the earth, and all the light places should be the world. That seems like you could think about it this way, except that he also refers to the place that to set up the earth is also to set up the place where gravity takes you all the way down, minimal potential energy. So it has something else except darkness, at least it seems like in the definition of what the earth is. But, and we'll get back to this opposition, but but is true generally, according to Heidegger, is the way he puts it is that the earth and the world are not indifferent opposites. He says that the earth juts into the world and the world sinks into the earth. So we're talking about this kind of dynamic. It's a bit difficult to understand. There's got to be some kind of a pressure there. So things that were concealed in the earth, they jut into the world and show themselves. And so this is relatively understood. It is a bit less clear why do things like sink into the earth, things that were in the world, they kind of sink into the earth. Heidegger talks about the earth as something protective, something that shelters, something that conserves. So perhaps if you look at it this way, then the sinking of the world into the earth is some kind of either you can say that it's a lack of the energy required to resist gravity. So when that energy wanes, then you kind of sink into the earth. Or you could talk about it more positively as a desire for shelter, preservation, conservation. So you go back to the earth when you need sheltering, conservation, and preservation. Interesting concept, I think. I'm not exactly sure about. I'm very clear about why the earth juts into the world. I'm a little bit less clear about why the world sinks back into the earth, unless it is really very energetically driven, and then we're talking really about how the objects try to assume the state with the least potential energy, like in physics. So the earth is really object also have to obey that law as well, to always assume the places closest to the earth sometime. Okay. So as I was saying, so this will be, let's talk a little bit about that. So, in the portraits that we saw last time, so here generally is a place where I think that going to art history and talking about artwork can really be very helpful from the point of view of phenomenology. This is a place where phenomenology can use the input from art history, because sometimes it's the other way around. So what we were talking about last time, I don't have a beamer, so we're not going to show images, but I'm sure that you remember the very contrasty portraits that we spoke about last time, the Baroque portraiture. And the way we spoke about it last time is really about that these portraits are very conscious of this basic metaphysical drama of going from the light to the dark. And the fact that it's kind of obvious once you say that, that does not mean that people were aware of that or that they're even aware of it now, because Heidegger has this whole theory about how it's not just that we forgot about metaphysics, but somehow we really actively undermine our own metaphysical understanding. So it's not just that we forgot, that we're kind of repressed it or something like that. So it's not like there's a clear understanding or of the fact that the portraits are really about the passage into the light for the purpose of self-showing. And then, so we spoke about chiaroscuro as the first attribute of this concept, which means that in chiaroscuro means, light and dark, chiaroscuro. And the fact that the whole drama is set up in a contrasty world, so that when the figures show up, they don't show themselves in their entirety, but some things are shown, some things are still concealed. And then we had the other concept, tenebrismo. Tenebroso means like darkness or gloom, and tenebrismo was to construct a painting as if the light was sculpted out of the darkness. So this was a common notion that they know, and this is even better evidence in the chiaroscuro that the painters who used this technique really understood the type of stuff that we're talking about, because the idea of tenebrismo is that you actually show, by showing that the light is sculpted out of the darkness, you kind of accentuate the sense of transformation. It's a very specific transformation. So it's a bit dynamic. Now, the thing is that many of these portraits don't actually establish the earth, because it's very clear what it means to establish the earth in a painting. Some kind of a horizontal line when the scene takes place. Sometimes you need to show the feet, which is quite rare actually in portraiture. Like in the sense of Velázquez, you can see kind of the architecture that establishes something like the earth. But anyway, I'm just saying that if the idea is that a work of art is to establish the earth, and we look at the earth more literally to establish the horizontal line that the whole thing stands on, there's a question at the very least about, I think it's an interesting distinction. I mean, I'm absolutely sure that an work of art does not have to have the earth in the strict sense of the term. Just look at these portraits, and many of them do not establish it. Nevertheless, it's an interesting thing to ask when is the earth establishes in an artwork, and what does it do to the artwork, or at the very least to ask to mind this distinction between artwork that establishes an earth inside and artworks that do not. It's also possible to say that these things will be a little bit different between sculpture and two-dimensional artworks that maybe in sculpture it's absolutely necessary to establish the earth. Maybe in the visual stuff it's not absolutely necessary. Anyway, I think it's a pretty interesting distinction, and something that, since he says later on that an artwork, that's what an artwork does. He says it does two things. It opens up a world and found this world on an earth beneath it. That's what an artwork has to do. And this is a very, very general statement. So let's just keep it and think about it a little bit later. Anybody has anything to say about this idea of the earth? You know, the distinction, artwork. Anyway, I suggest that we keep it as something to think about. So then comes another issue, which is also pretty interesting, that Heidegger says, so he talks about the strife or some kind of a war between the earth and the world. And he says that, as I was saying, they are not indifferent opposites, but they're actually kind of trying to get into each other. So there's some kind of a circular motion going between the earth and the world, and the other way around. And insofar, so when an artwork is dramatic, it catches a moment where the strife between the earth and the world is at a high point, and therefore, he says that you can freeze it, or that that the artwork is a point of rest in a dynamic process. I mean, that's what he says generally, that on the one hand it has to establish a world, put it on an earth, put the two in opposition to each other as two forces that want to kind of war with each other on any point, and yet the artwork itself can be a point of rest. So you kind of rest on the artwork, and then you can contemplate on the strife between the world and the earth. That is kind of the picture that he says, which is interesting because at least theoretically he says that the artwork is another like secondary open space. So the truth happens in the artwork itself, and it is not just representation of the truth of self-showing that happens in the world. So it gets, here it gets a bit complicated and perhaps unnecessarily so. And here I think that we can really look at both at photography and this kind of mode of portraiture that we were talking about to understand that the whole thing is really not as complicated. Okay, so let's go back a little bit to so last time we had the being that is deciding or planning to enter the light and self-show, and then on the other side, let's call this X, and then the Y would be someone who's looking around for open places and therefore excited about the possibility of being involved in the self-showing of somebody else, and they kind of get together and they create a contract of somehow together organize this self-showing. But it's not just the happening of the self-showing, but and here is a concept that I introduced very quickly last time that is Heidegger does not introduce, which is phenomenography. So when the seater and the artist do this thing together, they are not just producing an event of the self-showing, but they're introducing the possibility of phenomenography, namely to kind of stop this self-showing or to inscribe it on something in a way that will keep on telling the story of what happened in the self-showing moment. So that's, let's call that phenomenography. Just putting down an episode of self-showing or truthing generally in such a way that whatever happens there will continue to happen in the work of art afterwards in a kind of a continual basis. So if you're talking about it metaphysically, it kind of sounds like a very difficult concept. But if you are looking at art history and you're looking at portraits that we saw last time, these great Baroque portraits, that you really see those incredible figures like coming into the light, that's what happened. The original self-showing is continuously transmitted through those portraits. So that's what I'm saying. What sounds very iffy metaphysically, it's actually pretty simple to understand when you take these concrete examples. And this is one of the places where art history actually can really be helpful for phenomenology. Another thing that really gets Heidegger really kind of work like a pretzel is the issue of the extent to which the work of art is creative. What does it mean, the createdness of the work of art? And what does it actually presuppose? So, again, when you think either about a photographic portrait or a painted portrait, the issue of createdness becomes really a lot clearer. And let me explain it a little bit like that. So, perhaps last time when we spoke about the sitter and the artist like getting together, doing this weird contract where the sitter tries to impose as many restrictions, the artist wants to ignore them for the sake of making good artwork, and how weird it is that these type of contracts are actually undermine the idea of doing this self-showing in a free kind of way, but that's how it is. That's how it happens. But, and we also said that both sides really have an interest in keeping some level of authorship of this, let's call it phenomenograph, which is something that can be a portrait, painted, or a photograph. Let's call it a phenomenograph. So they really want to keep on some of the authorship of the phenomenograph, both of them. Because the sitter, this is their self-showing. For the artist, is the way the artist organized this self-showing. But let's not go from this description to the conclusion that the reason why X retains a certain measure of authorship is because X paid money for it. It's not only that, because some people are very good models and they know how to do that. So when they show themselves up, with the self-showing, they know how to self-show. So they know how to make the phenomenographer, they know what's going to happen, they anticipate it, and by doing so they know which side of the face, whether the right or the left, whether to do it up or down, how to stand, etc. And these aspects are going to be their control over the phenomenograph to continue with this concept. And this is a pretty interesting point that is really not discussed, because everybody always assumes that that we have like one side has the money, the other side has the creativity, and that's where that's where it goes. They are blended together. This is really not the right way to look at it. The X can be an experienced and knowledgeable person in showing up, and they will know how to position themselves in such a way that the artist, whatever the artist does, is going to be there. So what I'm saying, that a lot, if you really take it kind of seriously, you ask, well, what is the contribution of the artist, what is the contribution of the seeker? It's usually kind of complicated and kind of unnecessary to decompose precisely, provided that we understand the depth of the contribution, the potential contribution of the seekers. And if you want like evidence for that, then think about another situation that artists take models for their painting, but they pay the models, it's not the vice versa. And when they pay the models, why do they take them and not others? Because these models know how to do it well.
But what about, for example, if we have Baroque, it's well widely known that, for example, it wasn't morally accepted for females to sit as nude, so the artists had to ask prostitutes.
About that.
How does it fit?
You know, I owe you an answer to that. You really caught me here. Because Rubens did, and paint a lot of like naked
Also
people.
Caravaggio, for example.
Less totally naked. Yeah, no, he did.
But
You're right.
He had to ask certain female friends because he couldn't.
Yes. Okay, great that you actually mentioned it because, yes, Caravaggio chose the people, his models, because they were good looking and they were his friends and they knew how to do what he asked them to do. Yes, absolutely, that's true. So you're saying, okay.
Now
So you're saying that
how this fits into the.
Well, you see, the reason why I'm a little bit, last time we spoke about the fact that in order for the portrait to be really about self-showing, certain things cannot happen. For example, the person cannot smile, right? Because smile kind of kills it, and the whole fact that. Now, the second thing that cannot really happen is that the person is depicted as a category, like the merry drinker, the card player, the lute player, because when you see it that way, the person is a member of a category. So as a member of a category, it's not somebody who's like personally can do this transition. So the question is, can you do self-showing naked? That's a question that I'm asking. I guess in the 19th century, yes, like the Olympia thing, I think she's, you know this one, that she's like sitting like that, but you have pretty much an eye contact with her. Okay, but I'll give you a better, it's a very good question, really. And it also shows the complexity of the issue of how to do this phenomenograph, because you're saying some types of phenomenography are impossible to do with certain people, so there's an added complication there, which is absolutely true. Yes. Yeah. Let me think about it. Really, I'll go back to it for the next talk. So what I'm saying is just to really keep in mind that in reality, and if you ever photograph a portrait in a more or less formal setting, I'm sure you found, that some people are just, you look at them and they do half the work, and others you have to work really hard. look here, look there, do this, do that. Some people are just naturals in self-showing, and others are not. And it doesn't even depend necessarily on beauty, because beauty is a bit extrinsic to the entire discussion. They can be kind of interesting still, and you really get this sense of a focused look about someone in the process of self-showing, even the person is not that good-looking or interesting. Anyway, this was just in passing to explain that the issue of what is created can be actually pretty difficult to pinpoint and kind of unnecessary. Do you really need to, I guess, Manet, I think, used a lot of women who were washing the laundry women. I think you know about that. They were kind of, a lot of the models for the Impressionists generally were young women who work in this laundry thing. They came from the countryside. This was one of the type of stuff that they did. But these women, some of them were kind of were known, and everybody wanted to paint them because they were just good in self-showing. And we'll get back to this shortly. But this was an important thing to say, that the sitter does not necessarily only bring the money, because they can actually bring a lot more. And and if you really think about the kind of interaction between the X and the Y's, between the self-showing and the phenomenography, then just think about how difficult it is to really decompose those portraits into, aspect like what the artist put in, what the sitter put in, that's, and that's why the whole thing of the createdness is not that much of an issue, actually, I think. You can argue against it, and it really demystifies a lot of the discussion of Heidegger. This is just what portraits are, this is, you go from the, it's like self-showing, you go to the clearing, to the open area, that becomes the place where truth takes place. The artist created the phenomenograph of that thing, which continue keeping on giving this thing, which sounds like a very strange metaphysical concept, until you look at the 17th century portrait. That's exactly what it does. It keeps on giving this original moment. It actually happens all the time. There's nothing particularly mysterious about it, which I think it's also something to think about. And I guess the last thing that I want to, yes, it's already, well. The last thing that I want to talk about is the question, to go back to the issue of what is the attraction of X, the sitter, to do the self-showing, and what is the attraction of Y to capture it, to do a phenomenograph of that episode. So, with respect to Y, we spoke about it a little bit more. The motto of Y is let beings be. Just to let them be what they are, so when they self-show, they just self-show themselves as they are. And in order to let beings be, if you're making a phenomenograph, what you need to do is just to make sure that none of your intervention create obstacles for this free self-showing. So again, here it's a question of letting go. In order to do the phenomenograph well, then you have to let go as much as you can. Here it's a little bit, I think I mentioned it last time, it's a little bit like in the aesthetic context that you have to say, I should not think about my own interest or my own taste and all that. This is an artwork, so I really have to look at it just in categories that are right. This is, those of you who heard my Kant talk are familiar with that, except that here it's not something that you really construct the way Kant seems to be talking, like try to say, no, I'm not going to think about this, no, I'm not going to think about that. It's something that really happens by this complete letting go, something else comes up, and this somebody else is already has all those things that they need to, in order to do, to come to terms with the metaphysical nature. So why lets beings be? Because of that, why tries to let go of their own taste, their own interests, and all that. And according to Heidegger, when you let go of all the stuff that comes from your side, then you're in a state of freedom, like a very special kind of freedom that is not so obvious. Why call it freedom exactly? Let me see if I can explain that. If you set away all the stuff that is like your baggage, let's say, and you come into the situation as free of your own baggage as is possible to be, then whatever happens is not going, because you took all the inner obstacles, so you will be fine with whatever happens. That's the point. And if you are fine with whatever happens, and you know in advance that you will be fine with whatever happens, then that is supposedly a certain sense of freedom that you acquire. I think that's pretty interesting as a concept of freedom, that when think about it again in the skateboarding example, when you get to it, you have to be ready for every possibility and every possible move. If you really manage to be ready for anything that happens to you, then you feel the freedom to go wherever you want, as much as you want, because you know that whatever happens, you'll be able to deal with that. Anyway, that's the best I can do explaining this Heideggerian freedom concept. The question of X, why is it the joy of stepping into the limelight? So first of all, we really actually have this expression, stepping into the limelight. So first of all, we say that it's almost like even the way we talk about it, it is almost like a metaphysical phase, to step into it. And so people who step into the limelight are there, intentionally, of course. Then they're aware of the grandeur of the moment, and they're aware of the importance of the moment, and they're aware of the fact that if the self-showing will be done in the right way, so it's not just, the important is not just this particular self-showing, but the fact that you manage to really capture something in a phenomenal graph, it already means that people are capable of coming to terms with the most basic metaphysical level, which means that it's a form of self-realization that is actually quite an important thing. So when X steps into the limelight, then it's a kind of a grandeur thing, because it proves that humanity can be in touch with its own basic metaphysical state. So that means that this self-showing is about self-realization, not just of yourself, but of all humanity. That's how Heidegger talks about it. I find it also a little bit clumsy, this way of talking, I actually don't think that there's much to explain. We just have this expression, step into the limelight. And we understand the particular joy and maybe even ecstasy of stepping into the limelight. And there's no need to say that much more because you really recognize it as a kind of a special thing. What also occurred to me is that, at least when I take the portrait, I use very, very strong spots. And they really shine on the people that I photograph. And the impact of a light shining straight into your eyes more or less clear your mind from any other thought. It's very difficult to have another thought when you have like a strong light, so like beaming directly at your at your face, which means that this setup also has the capacity to clean the mind of X as well because of these lights and this grandeur of walking into the limelight. Now, the idea is not that every person at every time wants to step into the limelight. This is why the issue of the earth is so important, because Heidegger immediately defines something opposite that somehow wants to take you from the world, from the light, back into the sheltering, preserving of the earth, that the earth can give you. That you want to be sheltered and conserve and preserve by the earth. This I also don't find complete 100% convincing, because my feeling is that those who want to stay in the dark are there not necessarily because it's preserving and because it's sheltering. There is something else that you can kind of see in some kind of the extreme, like black metal type music of people who just want to stay in the dark for other reasons but shelter. I don't know, and I don't necessarily want to talk about it too much, but there's also other reasons to avoid the limelight and to kind of prefer the earth for other reasons. Okay, so let's call it,
I think, since I grew up in the metal and black metal scene, I think it's precisely about shelter.
Yes, okay.
So I think it totally fits the
Okay.
pattern.
Really?
Yeah, because usually those are very sensitive individuals who hide behind their taste of music, or who hide behind a lot. So I think it totally makes sense so that they represent something else than most of the scene does, I believe. So music is their shelter.
Okay.
So from being outcast maybe in other ways.
Great. Okay, this is really good. I thought it was a bit more aggressive, I was thinking about these anti-Christian aspects that kind of... but the fact that you're saying...
doesn't necessarily exclude each other.
Okay. But you're saying that it's not just hatred of the light, but it's also a lot about the desire for the preservation and shelter of the darkness. Great, okay. So, sorry, Heidegger. Great. Okay, so let's take it here and come back to this point next time.